Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Vincent Bako, the director of the Wheaton College Center for Applied Christian Ethics. Thank you. The enthusiasm, wow. This evening is an evening I'm very excited about, in part because of what occurred before this lecture, because I wanted to have the opportunity to talk with our guest about African American evangelicalism in front of a camera, and is the first of several interviews I'm hoping to do so that this important movement, this important community can have as part of its record the voices of very important people. And I think it's important that we hear these voices, particularly because we're in a time of a lot of voices saying a lot of things about race and culture and evangelicalism. And it's very important for what I would call legacy voices to be heard. And part of the reason that's important for legacy voices to be heard is that when we discover that we are standing on the shoulders of others, it can help us in our own circumstances. And it also helps provide us with perspective when we are going through whatever it is that we're going through. There's a peculiar thing that can happen to all of us, no matter what time of life that we're in. And that peculiar thing is that we can have this sense that I am the first one to have certain questions, I am the first one to have certain experiences. And our guest tonight and others that I hope to interview are great for helping us to see that actually that's really not the case. And so I'm very excited that the ball is rolling on this. So tonight's event is sponsored by the Center for Applied Christian Ethics, of which I'm the director, but also there is a project under the banner of Christianity Today called the Big Tent Initiative. And my friend Ed Gilbreth is helming that. Ed's here, if you want to give everybody a wave. That's Ed, everybody. And I'm very excited that together we have planned for this event and hopefully for others. Well, I keep saying my guest without saying his name. His name is Ronald Potter. So Reverend Ronald Potter is someone that I first met at a conference in 1993 that was held at Geneva College about African American evangelicalism. And I don't think we had lots of conversation at that conference, but I did say something to him at the end of it after he gave the closing keynote address, and we've had many other interactions since then. And in some way, I think he is one of the people that you could call a walking encyclopedia of the history of African American evangelicalism. And I think it is important when someone is that kind of person that we have the opportunity to hear from them. And so tonight, Reverend Potter is going to talk with us a little bit about his own narrative and journey, but also put some perspective in terms of thinking about what is ahead. So he is going to lecture for about 45 minutes, and then I'll come back up. We'll have some Q&A, so please bring your questions of whatever kind they are. And he'll also be happy to chat after it is over. But now it is time for my preamble to come to an end and for Reverend Potter to take the stage. So, Ron, so glad that you are here. Welcome.
Well, good evening, people. Good evening. Well, as I get this situated here, my pastor. I just became associate pastor of a church outside of Jackson, Mississippi, and what he uses, he has a podium, and then he has a place to put his water on. So I'll just have to put this someplace else while doing this. But it is, this is this whole day. Oh, okay, all right, thank you. Thank you.
It's an unconventional.
Unconventional, right, but that's cool, though. That's cool. I also put some of my materials here as well. This evening, in fact, this whole day has been part of a project that Dr. Bacote and Ed Gilbreth from Christianity Today and I thought was going to happen sometime in 2008 when I was teaching at a Christian college in Memphis, Tennessee. And the three of us were members of an organization that was founded by one of my mentors. I have several mentors. Some people only have one, some have none. I have several. I have a whole army of mentors. Some of them have been more mentoring than others, but I do have, I'm serious. I have quite a few mentors. I have mentors from 1965 to 1969. Those were the pivotal years of my Christian growth when I first became a Christian in January 1965 here in Chicago. I'm a native Chicagoan. And so I had mentors during those early stages of my Christian growth. And then from 1969 until 1989, 20-year period, and then a whole lot after that. That's one of the things that I learned from Dr. Stephen Garber, who has written many books for Christian colleges. His finest book, in my judgment, is entitled The Fabric of Faithfulness, which was initially published in 1996 by University Press, and he revised it in 2004. And Garber talks about the three areas of Christian formation. I actually used his book at 2 Christian colleges where I taught. I used his first edition at Belhaven College in Jackson, Mississippi, fine Christian college in Jackson, and then I used the textbook again at Wheaton College in Memphis, Tennessee, 2006 to 2008. And I thought that most of my students, most of whom were Christians of the Evangelical variety, I thought that the book would turn them on, but it did not. And I wondered what was wrong. But Garber talks about the 3 stages of Christian formation, or what's needed to enable college students, once they graduate, to continue their Christian commitment. And those 3 areas, according to Garber, were the cultivation of a Christian worldview, or a Christian perspective, or the cultivation of the Christian mind. The second stage is, according to Garber, being able to develop to understand the sociological foundations of knowledge. Garber pulls upon one of my mentors, the late, great sociologist Peter L. Berger. I was an undergraduate student under Berger, at Rutgers University after I left Wheaton, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. And then the third, perhaps most important area of Christian formation is to work all of that out within a context of Christian community. In other words, you don't simply do this as an individual, but you do it within a context of community. And so some of my remarks tonight will reflect Garber's, I will call it, methodology of Christian formation. I've entitled these reflections this evening, Looking Back, Looking Forward. Looking Back, Looking Forward. Subtitled, Reflections of an Older New Black Evangelical. Reflections of an older, quote-unquote, New Black Evangelical. This is not my first time at Wheaton. Of course, I just said that I was a student here from 1968 to 1970. But I've been here 3 other times after my leaving the campus in September of 1970. I came back to Wheaton to actually deliver academic lectures as part of the Wheaton College Theology Conference, both in 1995 under the title Christian Apologetics in the Postmodern World. And my presentation, which was published by University Press that next year, was entitled Christian Apologetics in the African American Grain. And then I was invited back that next year for the Wheaton College Theology Conference. And that conference focused on theological resources for racial reconciliation, the gospel in black and white. And that lecture was also published as a chapter in InterVarsity's volume, The Gospel in Black and White. And then my third coming back to Wheaton was in June, I think, of 2006. President Walter McRae, who was president of the National Black Evangelical Association, of which I've been a member of for a very long time. We had a special convocation here on campus at Wheaton, I believe June of 2006, and there I contributed another paper to that. So this is my 4th time back here at Wheaton, and again, a project that Dr. Bricote and Brother Gilbert and I thought would happen in 2008. Sometimes when you think that you have laid to rest a project or an idea, God has a different story, does he not? And I thought that the project was dead in the water until Brother Bricote and Brother Gilbert got hold of me earlier this year and said, you know what, it's been several years, but I think the time is ripe to make it happen. And so that is what not only this evening, but this whole day, as we've done a very good interview a couple hours ago, right here on the stage, and throughout walking the campus. Of course, a lot of change at Wheaton since I was here. Began here some 53 years ago or so. So I just want to thank Brother Ed Gilbreth and Dr. Bricote, longtime friends of mine, for making this happen. So let me begin with the first phase of this presentation, what I'm going to call looking back. Looking back on my participation in a 50-plus year period of what I'm going to call progressive black evangelicalism, something that began in my history 50 years ago. Again, I said that I'm a native of Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And, hey, all right. Yes, indeed. And had a salvific encounter with Jesus in January 65, January 24th, 1965 to be precise. I was a member of the church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and actually between 1964 and January 65, I was quite religious, and by that I mean that I actually enjoyed going to church. Not that I understood what the pastor was saying. Actually, I couldn't care the least what he was saying. But I just enjoyed being at church. I enjoyed helping the men wash dishes after church, after we served dinner every Sunday. I enjoyed that. I really did. What I did not enjoy was being hassled by a couple of brothers who older than me, who kept sweating me about what it means to be saved. And I said, what are you talking about? What is that? I have no idea what that language is, saved, born again. What are you talking about? And so every time I would see them, I would go the other direction, okay? Until the 24th day of January, between the hours of 12 midnight and 2 a.m. in the morning, when I simply happened to pick up this big old Bible that my mother got that came with our encyclopedia set, And I said, well, I would like to read this Bible. Where should I start? So I began with what it said. It said the Old Testament. That's what it said. So I said, let me start here. But I couldn't read. I couldn't make out the words. I said, this is much too hard. Let me go through this other testament. What is that called? It's called the New Testament. Had a big old picture of a European-looking Jesus, And I said, all right, I'll start here. And when I got to 2 chapters, chapters 5 through 7, which is the famous Sermon on the Mount, that is when something happened in my life. Now, Sermon on the Mount is not usually understood as being an evangelistic portion of Scripture, okay, But it challenged my false presuppositions of what it meant to be a Christian in the first place, the Sermon on the Mount. I did not do most of the bad things that young teenagers did, especially in a low-income housing project where I lived, a project called Stateway Gardens, right next to an even larger project called Robert Taylor Homes, okay, right across the street from Robert Taylor Homes, across the street from the Dan Ryan Expressway. And if you look further north, you'll see Comiskey Park, where whenever someone hit a home run, the scoreboard would just explode, That's how I know that one of my favorite Sox players had hit a home run, okay? Between the hours of 12 midnight and 2 a.m. in the morning, something happened. And what happened is that this character, Jesus, burst all of my presumptions of what it meant to be a good person. I mean, it said that Jesus said, this person, Jesus said that you have heard it said that you would not hate, that whoever hates is a murderer. And then I said, oh, well, I'm safe there. I haven't, a lot of kids my age have actually murdered people right here in the projects, right here in this very building. I said, so I'm safe, until I read further where Jesus said, whoever hates his brother without a cause is guilty of hellfire already. And I said, I don't like that. That includes me, because I had all kind of problems with my younger brother, You have heard it said, Jesus said, that you would not commit adultery. I thought I was safe there. Because a whole lot of kids my age were engaged in a whole lot of sexual activity. But I thought I was safe until Jesus said, but whoever lusts has committed adultery already. And I said, oh, that hurts. I saw myself through a x-ray machine, a spiritual x-ray machine of Jesus. There was no moment where I bowed my head down and said, Lord Jesus, come into my heart, please save me. No, I didn't have that kind of language. I simply closed the Bible when I finished the Sermon on the Mount, and I went to bed because I had to get up for Sunday school the next day. And so I got up, and I confronted the person who had been witnessing to me, a guy named Leonard Harris from the Older Boys and Girls Conference. And I said, Leonard, you know, you've been using this strange language, saved, born again, and all that. I have no idea what you're talking about, but whatever it means, I think that's what happened to me last night. And I was like the person reflected in St. John's Gospel who was healed of his blindness by Jesus. And when the Pharisees came to him and said, who healed you? Now we know it wasn't Jesus because he's of Beelzebub. And it is as if that previously blind brother said, you know, don't try to confuse me with all of these theological meanings of Jesus, whether Jesus is this or that. I haven't the slightest idea. What I do know is this. I was once blind, and now I see. And that's where I was on the 24th day of January. Now, in time, in just a period of days and weeks, I realized I had to do more than simply testify that I was a Christian. I needed some type of information. And so what I did, I turned on the radio to WMBI, the radio station of Moody Bible Institute. And I began to listen to the radio answer man, Robert J. Little, the father of Paul Little of InterVarsity fame. I would not meet Paul Little until several years later. But his daddy, Robert J. Little, the radio answer man, oh, I love that program. In fact, I called in and asked him my question sometime, you know. And then that led to me invading Moody Bookstore on LaSalle Street. And I would literally buy everything that Moody Bookstore had in regards to Christian apologetics, Christian doctrine, Christian theology, not devotional literature. I shied away from that. You know, that wasn't heavy enough for me. But apologetics, Christian theology, Christian philosophy, Christian worldview, oh, that was, I bought the bookstore out. I remember the only book about the Bible that I bought was an Old Testament book entitled Thy Word is Truth by Dr. Young, a famous Old Testament scholar. And so that would lead to bigger and better things, so I thought. I also began to discover Billy Graham. Now, we just left the Billy Graham Museum, which was not here when I was here, of course. But I began to listen to Graham's Sunday morning radio show before going to church. And then when Graham had his crusade in Chicago in 1965, I actually bought his the entire crusade messages at the McCormick Place, the old McCormick Place before it burned down. And so I said, yeah, this is great. And so I found out that he was an alumnus of a school called Wheaton. And I said, you know what? I think I'd like to go there. Now, you know, that that was very difficult given some circumstances. But before Wheaton, and this is looking back now, becoming an evangelical. Now, although I knew I was a Christian, although I knew I had met Jesus, and all of that, I did not have that language of an evangelical until a member of our church, Grant Memorial AME Church, got hold of me in 1967 and said, have you ever heard of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship? And I said, InterVarsity, what? What is that? He said, yeah, they're having a convention at the University of Illinois in December. Now, Champaign-Urbana, that's my mom's home. And so Champaign was always great with me. That's where her parents, in fact, all of her siblings lived in Champaign. So I said, you know what? That'll give me a chance to go see Grandma and Grandma Pope and my mother's family, mother's parents. And I said, yeah, I'm game. He said, yeah, well, this is what it's going to be about. I put your name down, and you'll go to Urbana 67. And that's what I did. And I heard such speakers as John R.W. Stott. Now, Graham had preached there the previous Urbana 64. So I missed Graham. But I got to hear John R. Stott and these words like dichotomy, right? And they had this missionary preaching about the dichotomy. And so learning these new words, right? Dichotomy, that sounded good, There were only a few African-American students there. Out of maybe about 8,000 to 9,000 students, there were probably only less than 200 Black American students there. But there was an older mentor who was their older Black mentor. Ruth, help me out here. He taught at Moody Bible Institute. He was part of NBEA. He taught Bible at Moody, and he was a singer. Had that deep song, a deep voice. He taught at Moody Bible Institute, African-American professor, adjunct professor at Moody. And he was our adult leader at Urbana 67. By our, I mean the 25 or so Black students who he was able to identify. It was at Urbana 67 that I met such persons as Paul Gibson, who became the first InterVarsity leader, Black leader in New York City. The late Elwood Ellis, who was the first Black campus minister of InterVarsity. Dr. Carl Ellis, long before he became Dr. Carl Ellis, who's now the provost at Reformed Theological Seminary. All of us go back to 1967. And so we got together because we wanted to get more Black students to come. But we felt somehow that we were a tad bit ostracized there. We didn't know why. So we had an all-night prayer meeting, literally all-night prayer meeting. And there was a reporter from Christianity Today there at our all-night prayer meeting. And so in the January edition of CT, we were actually quoted at the very back of CT. The article was called Angst or Anxiety Because of Race. And they quoted Elwood Ellis, who was at that time, he was a sophomore at Shaw University. They quoted Carl Ellis, who was at that time a junior at Hampton Institute. And they quoted me, a high school senior here in Chicago. And I'm somewhat embarrassed by what I had to say because CT quoted me. I mean, Gilbert, go back to the archives. It's right there. I wish you didn't find it. said, Potter, what do you think is the major problem? And I said, the major problem is sin. So you can do everything you can to help out the Negro social situation, but you got to keep your eyes on the main thing, which is saving his soul. No further articulation than that. So it's still in the CT archives, January 1968. Okay. That would lead to Wheaton College, understanding what it meant to become a quote-unquote evangelical. Well, in the spring of 1968 is when I discovered a group of black Christians, back then they called themselves Negro Christians, called the National Negro Evangelical Association, the NNEA, which was started in Los Angeles in 1963. And the 68 convention was held at Antioch Baptist Church here in Chicago. And so I and a couple of other friends of mine, we went to the convention, and this is before Bill and Ruth Bentley got married, let's see, in 1968. And the outgoing president was a guy named Howard Jones, who was part of the Billy Graham staff. He was one of the first quote-unquote Negro evangelist with the Billy Graham team. And he was the outgoing president of NNEA. Tom Skinner had just published Black and Free. And so I had met Skinner at Moody Church at a Young Life meeting in 1967. And so I said, oh, Skinner's here? Oh, and I want to get that book, Black and Free. So I stood in line for him to autograph my book, Black and Free. Others of note were there. And I said, you know, this organization is one that I need to find out more about. Well, later that year is when Wheaton College opened up. Now, I didn't do all that well, especially my senior year in high school. But, you know, oftentimes the sovereignty of God oftentimes overcomes whatever issues that you might have. And so, as we approach the summer of 1968, some reps from Wheaton get in contact with me and say, well, think about coming here. And at that time, Wheaton College, this was after the assassination of MLK in April of '68, Wheaton had decided, now they had always have had a splattering of black students here at Wheaton. I mean, going back really 1940s and maybe even further than that. Dr. Bentley is a graduate of Wheaton. And I think to this very day, she has the highest grade point average in the history of Wheaton College. She went on to do a PhD at the University of Alabama, becoming the first black woman to get a PhD from that university. And so after King's assassination, the school decided that they would bring a collection of minority students from two cities, Chicago and New York. And so before the end of the spring semester of '68, in Edmond Chapel, they made an announcement that said, look, anybody who would like a minority roommate for the upcoming fall, either black or Puerto Rican, as you leave Edmond Chapel, put your name into this little drop box, and then we'll contact the minority student that might be here in the fall. Well, sometime in July, I get a letter from my new roommate. His name was Eric Rushke from Falmouth, Massachusetts, and we'll forget that, see. Now, he had my complete dossier. I knew nothing about him, you know, because his purpose was to kind of serve as a mentor to me as I navigate the Wheaton system. And so there were 33 of us, half from Chicago, half from New York, and they called the program the Compensatory Education Program, to compensate for the inferior education that you Negroes and Puerto Ricans might have gotten in your jacked up educational system in Chicago and in New York. And so, in fact, we had to come to this campus 3 weeks before the fall semester began, so that they could vet us, because some of us did not make it. So they had to vet us to become students here in the fall of '68. Some of my best friends did not make the vet, and they had to leave. So we took a battery of exams and got acquainted to Wheaton culture, and so thus began the fall semester 1968. Now, I was at Fisher Hall. My roommate again was Eric Rushke, and he was okay. Eric was decent. It was my suite mate that I had problems with. At Fisher Hall back then, you had your suite mate who also would share the bathroom with you, right? And so my suite mate, who was from Barrington, Illinois, he would always look at me in the mirror whenever I was combing my hair. And so one day I asked him, I said, well, why are you staring at me as I'm brushing or combing my hair? He said, well, when I comb my hair takes on a whole different form. See that? He said, but your hair remains the same. I said, do I have to mess up my hair so I can show you what I look like when I first get up in the morning? Then we had another student from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, who, for the first time in his life, saw black people actually swim, because he had been taught that black people, when they get into the pool, because of their body structure, they automatically sink to the bottom. Oh yeah, he wasn't joking, he was serious, from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And so I said, I'm not sure about this, and I came here because Graham came here, but I'm having a rough time so far. Nothing overt. Nobody called me a nigger or any of that. But you see, oftentimes that which is implicit is oftentimes much more cancerous than that which is what? Explicit. One of the saving graces was every Friday evening, the house is gone now, but every Friday evening, I would go over for some snacks and cookies at Chaplain Evan Welch's house. Chaplain Evan Welch. Oh, what a marvelous man. Loved him to death. Chaplain Welch. Every Friday he would invite students over his house, and we would sing, and he taught Bible here at Wheaton. I was in his Bible class here at Wheaton. Evan Welch was one of those really fine jewels that I ran into in that first semester. Before that first semester ended, around this time in 1968, this is September 29th, tomorrow September 30th, September 30th, 1968, a short little man with mountain knickers came to Wheaton to give a series of addresses. His name was Francis Schaeffer. This was his second time at Wheaton. He was here in 1965, at that time, working on his book, The God Who Was There, in 1965, but it wasn't released until 1968. I had no idea who Schaeffer was. He was this funny-looking man with these knickers on, and he had this high-pitched voice, true truth, true truth. Schaeffer was unique. He had the uncanny knack of focusing on a particular individual in the audience. And irrespective of what he was doing, he would turn his attention to that one person. Schaefer looked at me, and I think he was talking with some faculty members or other important VIPs. He stopped what he was doing. He walked over to me and asked me who I was. He said, "Do you have some time?" I said, "Yeah, I have some time. I don't have my next class until late this afternoon." He said, "Let's have lunch." Schaefer, let's have lunch. So we ate lunch at the campus snack shop. And at that point, I was a thoroughgoing doctrinaire fundamentalist. Schaefer did not look like an evangelical to me. Not with these crazy knickers on. I didn't understand a word he was saying. He didn't sound evangelical. So would you believe it? A 18, almost 19-year-old student from the south side of Chicago, I actually had the audacity to give him a theological exam at the campus snack shop. And he just sat back in the booth, smiled, and actually answered my questions. As Schaefer was ending his spiritual emphasis week here at Wheaton, the 30th of September through October 4th, as his entourage, which included Os Guinness, were about to depart for L'Abri, they had formed a prayer circle. Schaefer saw me through the corner of his eye and said, "Come on and join us. Come here. Join hands and join us." I didn't understand a word Schaefer was saying and would not for the next couple of years. But what attracted me to him was that he looked upon me as a person of dignity. That, later Schaefer would say, would be the final apologetic, to treat people with dignity out of love. I didn't realize it at that time. Now, those messages would be published that next year by University Press under the title Death in the City. That was his Spiritual Emphasis Week speeches in 1968. Well, 68, 69, 1970 was a pivotal year because now, before we go into 1970, April 1969, the campus brought evangelist Tom Skinner to give the Spiritual Emphasis Week address that week. Now, again, I met Skinner. I saw Skinner at Moody Church in 1967. I got my book autographed by him in 1968. But now he's coming to Wheaton. And in the spring of '69, many of the minority students, black and Puerto Rican, were beginning to feel a sense of angst of being here. We couldn't put our finger on what was wrong because nobody called us niggas or spics, but we knew that something was radically wrong. We just could not articulate it. Skinner got up and Skinner began to articulate what we were going through at Wheaton. And my, Edmund Chapel, you could hear some voices say, "Right on!" Now, that kind of rattled some folk. I mean, big Edmund Chapel, kind of rattled some folks. What is that? What does right on mean in the first place? Skinner had moved from his Negro stage to his black stage, partially helped, by the way. No, I would say greatly helped by his colleague. And who is his colleague? What's his colleague? He just wrote a book. He just revised a book just a few months ago. The iconic professor of preaching, head of the chapel at Fuller Theological Seminary. Come on, Bill Pannell. Bill Pinnell came out with a book just a month shy of Skinner's Black and Free in 1968. And when Pinnell came out with this book called My Friend the Enemy in the spring of '68, I said, my goodness, he is describing everything that I'm going through right now. Well, Skinner in '69 began to further articulate that. And Tom, for whatever reason, took an attachment to me. Skinner began to mentor me from 1969 on. He invested his money, his time, and his skills into my well-being. In fact, Skinner hired me as his student staff summer 1969. Well, goodness gracious. That takes us then into a very important year, 1970. 1970, the temperature was rising in the country. Politically, racially, religiously, in every way, it was rising. 1970, many of the minority students here at Wheaton felt that we had to have our issues addressed because this was not working. What is the nature of the this that was not working? The this that was not working was not only racial non-reconciliation, but the ways in which racism had become almost part and parcel of white evangelicalism. That Skinner made very clear in Edmund Chapel in April of 1969. And it was becoming more apparent in 1970. So, in the April of 1970, Wheaton had a special, everything is special when it comes to minorities, right? Special. Had a special chapel for minorities. So minorities could actually speak for themselves. We're going to pick 3 of them. I was the third person who would speak. Now, funny, when I woke up this morning at Harbor House, 'cause I got here late last night, I couldn't even see anything, it was so dark. But this morning I woke up and I said, is that Edmund Chapel right there? It is Edmund Chapel right there. That particular day, Wheaton had a special minority chapel. I was the third and last speaker. By the way, very important person played a special part in my life at that time. The late John Alexander, the editor and publisher of a magazine called The Other Side magazine. Now, I knew his father. I knew his dad. I loved his dad and his mom. But John Alexander was the philosophy instructor here at Wheaton. I took him for a philosophy class, Intro to Philosophy, in 1969. Now, I think because he was so gracious, he just gave me a C. Because I know doggone well I couldn't have earned it. Rene Descartes, who's that? You know, Wittgenstein, who's that? You know, what the heck are you talking about? Interestingly, although he benevolently gave me a C for his Intro to Philosophy class, never in his wildest dreams, nor mine at that time, would I have even surmised that I would become a philosophy professor for 35 years. You know, never. Seeds that are planted, we don't even know that they're planted. Alexander planted those seeds. He said, you know, you might not be a philosopher right now, but I know at some time you're going to develop into one. I just ended a 35-year career as a professor of philosophy just a year ago. Alexander was there in chapel, and I got up, this is April 1970, I got up and had the audacity to say, you know, Wheaton's motto is what, for Christ and his kingdom. I got up there and said, this institution is the very antithesis of Christ and his kingdom. Oh, goodness gracious, you could see Edmund Chapel just, it was like an earthquake, you know. It wasn't until years later that Alexander told me, that he said, Ron, do you know that you got me fired from Wheaton? He said, I never told you this. This is 1995, about what happened in 1970 in Edmund Chapel. I said, what do you mean? He said, yes, after you said that, people were furious. Hudson Taylor Armerding was furious. Dean Melton was furious. Most of your professors were furious. I came to your aid, and I told them, I said, well, you could have chosen other words. He said, by the way, did you know what Potter meant by the word antithesis? You know. Hudson Armerding came to, and so Alexander defended me. Hudson Taylor Armerding came to his house that same day, and Alexander knew what was going to happen. So when Armerding came, he came to Alexander's house when they were eating dinner. He didn't wait until he got to his office here at Wheaton. He came to his house while they were having dinner. Armerding did. President Armerding did. And Alexander knew what was up. Opened the door, and he said, you don't have to say anything. Here's my resignation. And Hudson T. Armerding said, yes, you're right, I was going to fire you anyway, because you had no business defending this radical named Potter. And secondly, you're against the war in Vietnam, aren't you? Alexander said, yeah, I am. He said, well, I can't fire you since you just resigned. Alexander played a major part of my life because he allowed me to write for the Other Side magazine. I became part of his editorial committee, Other Side magazine, and would write a number of essays and articles for him. 1970, a month later, and this is what was the ultimate strain of my relationship with Wheaton College. There was a National Black Christian Students Conference held at a Christian college near Boston, and the first of its kind. Tom Skinner called me probably in late or mid-April, and he said, Ron, we're having a conference of Black Christian students, about 200 of them around the country, from a variety of Christian colleges. And Bill Pennell said he cannot make it. But Bill knows you, and we both decided that you're going to fill his shoes at this conference. I said, no. I said, Skinner, that can't be. I'm a sophomore here at Wheaton. You're talking about somebody else. He said, no. He said, Ron, hear me. I just talked with Bill Pennell, and we both decided that you're going to represent Pennell at this conference. And that's all there is to it, Potter. Skinner flew me to Boston, and it was something one of a kind. Skinner himself was the keynote speaker, spoke for 2 hours, which would lay the foundations for his iconic 1970 Liberator speech in December 1970 at InterVarsity. Well, I was part of this panel discussion that Pennell was supposed to be on, but he couldn't make it, so they chose me, a lowly sophomore from Wheaton. And Skinner kept pressing me on this panel about how I felt about being at Wheaton. And I kept saying to myself, Ron, keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, you're going to get yourself in bad trouble, bad trouble, like the late great congressman talked about bad trouble as being good trouble. But at that time I said, no, this is some bad trouble if I'm honest. But Skinner kept pushing, he kept pushing. How do you feel about Wheaton College? And this is what I said, verbatim. Christianity, as it is expressed in American society, has been neocolonialistic, oppressive, and racist. This has taken its most blatant form on evangelical Christian campuses. We talk a lot about peace on our Christian campuses, We talk a lot about the bringing together of people, blacks, black and white, on evangelical campuses. Yet many times this has been primarily based upon the norms of white evangelicals. As a student at a Christian campus, oh, no, I take that back. As a Christian at an evangelical campus, I have expressed something that Langston Hughes's fictitious character, Jesse B. Simple, said when he said, I know I'm going to heaven because I just got back from hell. What Jesse was simply trying to say was that the whole concept of Christianity that he was related to was basically an oppressive ideology. It basically took upon itself racist forms. And black students on Christian campuses are saying today, either you are going to offer a viable education, a viable socialization, or hang the whole thing. In other words, Christian campuses are going to have to become relevant institutions, workable institutions. And unless there can be these three things, viability, workability, and relevance, then we might as well hang the whole idea of evangelical Christianity. You see, what we have done, we have associated biblical Christianity with the norms and mores of evangelical subculture. We have had a wedding between Christianity as expressed in the Bible and cultural evangelicalism. And the two have been so closely knit together that one can hardly differentiate them. Therefore, a student in his junior or senior year at these institutions will say, if that is Christianity, I want no part of it. And what that cat does is that he begins to throw off the whole thing, not being able to differentiate between the two. You see, this student went to a Christian nursery school, Christian kindergarten, Christian grammar school, Christian high school, Christian academy, and eventually off to Wheaton, Moody, or Trinity. And what he begins doing is associating Christianity with that culture. You see, and he eventually begins to throw out both the baby and the bathwater, the Christ of the New Testament, along with cultural evangelicalism. What we should do is to differentiate between the two, between true biblical Christianity and what we have experienced on evangelical campuses, to split this relationship, do away with this traditional jive, and become related to the workability of true biblical Christianity. Unless we can be about that as faculty, as administrators, and as students, we might as well hang the whole bit. And then I went on and on and on and on and on. Now, what I did not realize was that sitting in the audience was the dean of Wheaton College, the academic dean, Dean Melton. I did not know that until later. And so I took a job in New York for 3 months working for a Christian social work agency, working with at-risk Puerto Rican youth. When I tried to come back to Wheaton the 15th of September of 1970, I received a message in my mailbox that Dean Melton wants to see you. So I figured that, well, there were 2 courses that I flunked in the spring. I know I flunked geology, and I forgot what the other course was. So at the very most, I should have been put on academic pro. So I went to see Dean Melton, opened the door. So I was ready for the heat. I was ready for the heat, ready to repent. I'm going to do better, Dean. He did not say a mumbling word about what I had done or not done in the spring. Not a mumbling word about what I did or did not do academically. What he did do, he opened up his desk drawer and pulled this out and said, I want a public retraction of everything you said in this magazine. That's what I want. And I said, ooh, this is a tight spot, Potter, to myself. I said, Dean, I can't do that. What is written is written. I can't do that. And so he said, well, bye-bye. And that ended my 2-year sojourn at Wheaton College. 1971 through, and I'll make this brief, was a continued time of what I call awakening to the relationship between Christian faith and the racial duress in our country. I'm not going to say a whole lot about that because of time, but something happened simultaneously as I began to engage in some very serious critiques of Christianity. It was during that time, January 1971, that I met the godfather of what is called Black liberation theology. Now, I had read James H. Cone's first book, Black Power and Black Theology, 1969, but Elmhurst College, not too far from here, was planning to do a Black theology conference January 1971. I went to hear Cone, and that was an experience of its own. 1971, Cone became a kind of a mentor of mine as well. He recently died April of 2018, just a few months shy of his 80th birthday. Now, although Cone and I did not share the same theological worldview, and we did not, I went on to write a 54-page critique of Cone's theology at Rutgers University, critiquing his social ethics. Now, his PhD student who read it, who's now ending a career at Emory University in theology, a Jamaican brother, read it when he was doing his PhD work under Cone. He said, "Did you write this? This should be published." He said, "Go see Jim Cone about this." I did. Cone didn't like it. He didn't like my critique of him using Peter Berger or other white theorists at that time. Didn't like it at all. He said, "Well, if I was going to grade it, I would give it a C as a seminarian." You know. Hey, look, Jim and I don't call him Dr. Cone. He was a friend. Jim, that's his name. I love Jim. The last time I saw Jim alive at the American Academy of Religion in 2015 in Atlanta. And you know, the thing that attracts me to AAR is that they have this huge, this big book extravaganza. And I buy all these, oh my gosh, I could be in there for the whole week just buying books at AAR. Well, my last day at the convention, I had to hurry up. My wife and sister and I had to get out of there. But Cone stopped me in front of the bookstore. Usually we talk all the time, but this time Cone really wanted to talk. He said, "Well, Nana, how you doing? How are you really doing?" You know. I said, "Well, Jim, I gotta leave, man." I said, No. Let's spend some time, a few minutes. Ron, how are you doing? What are your projects you're working on? And boy, we had a great talk in front of the bookstore. And that was the last time I would see Cone alive, because he died in April of 2018. And it still hurts me that he's gone. Although we were on opposite ends of the pole theologically, and we were. Not going to lie about that, we were. But Jim was a mentor of mine. You know, in many respects, he helped me to think through the new Black Evangelicals that John Alexander had asked me to be the special editor of, July-August edition of 1975. I complained about the previous edition in 74 entitled the Young Evangelicals. And I told Alexander, I said, John, not a single black person was included in this progressive movement. He said, well, fine. Well, guess what? You're in charge of next year's issue. You're going to handpick the authors, and it's going to be in your shoes. The whole issue is. And so the 10th year anniversary issue of the Other Side magazine was entitled The New Black Evangelicals. And I wrote the editorial, several pages. I didn't realize about 4 years later, as I was at a conference with the late Dr. Gayrod Wilmore, a nationally renowned black church historian, he and I were roommates at this conference he and I were at. And I had a copy of the Other Side magazine, The New Black Evangelicals. I went out to lunch. When I came back, Wilmore was reading it. I was kind of, ooh, no, don't read my stuff, you know. He said, did you write this? I said, yes, sir. You got to say yes, sir, to Gayrod Wilmore. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, I did write that. He said, this is really good. He said, you know, Cone and I are co-editing a book due to come out next year called Black Theology Historical Documents, 1966-1979. He said, I would like for you to rewrite this and make it a bit more scholarly. I'm going to send it to Cone and see what Cone feels. About 2 weeks later, I get this phone call from Jim Cone, from his office at Union Seminary. He said, Ron, I want to see you in person. Come to Union Seminary. Let me talk to you about your article for the Other Side magazine. I said, really? He said, yes, I want to see you tomorrow. I got on the train and went to his office, huge office at Union Seminary. He sat me down and he said, Ron, you're a good writer. Amazingly, you're a good writer. I like your stuff. And Wilmore and I decided to include this as a chapter in our book, Black Theology, Historical Documents. And I said, really? Me? He said, yes, Ron, yes. You got to believe in yourself sometimes. Yes, you know. As I look at the people who have mentored me throughout these years, Tom Skinner, Bill Pinnell, perhaps the one who stands out perhaps the most is the deceased husband of this woman who's before us here, Dr. Ruth Lewis Bentley. And I'm talking about her late husband, William Hiram Bentley, who was the first African-American to get a BD, which is now called MDiv, from Fuller Seminary in 1959. The first. A colleague of mine, who's now dean of an AME seminary in South Carolina, took the time to research Bill Bentley in the records at Fuller. And he found all kinds of articles from Bill, some I had never read before. And so I begged him to send me a copy. He said, no, Ron, I can't do that. He said, I know you'll hijack it. He said, this is my property now, you know. But Bill Bentley, one of the founders of what would become NBEA, National Black Evangelical Association, founded in 1963. Bill became my W.E.B. Du Bois. Some people would say that Francis Schaeffer is their C.S. Lewis. Bill Bentley became my W.E.B. Du Bois. He was an expert on Du Bois. He was an expert on almost everything. I would go to their house located on West Madison Street. At the time, a ghetto of ghettos. That's right. I won't say before, along with my father-in-law, Dr. John Perkins, who believes about living with the poor, Bill and Ruth Bentley did that here in Chi-Town, West Madison Street. Ruth, I didn't like driving to your place because, you know, you all's cars were always broken into. I didn't want my car broken into, you know. But when I would come, Bill, a graduate from Fuller, the first black American to get a BD, MDiv from Fuller. He was a social worker. He was an adjunct professor of theology and black church history at Trinity Div School. And the first floor was a 3-level house. The first floor was his church. Bill pastored a storefront Pentecostal church. That was on the first floor. This high-powered black public intellectual pastored a church of the downtrodden. Right there, black Pentecostals, they didn't know what the heck Bill was saying in terms of theology, but they knew that he loved them, he cared for them, he pastored them. And then as we reached the second floor, that was the beginning of his library. Oh, Lord, I love being in there. I just would say, oh, this is like heaven. This is like AAR, you know. I mean, books on psychology, black history, black sociology, theology, philosophy. I said, oh, I'm in Wonderland. He would just let me go through his books. And then the living quarters, the third floor, he had more books. And then when Bill and Ruth had the twins in 1975, twin girls, Bill and Ruth had to protect their property because they had a rat problem. Remember that, Ruth? Yeah, that's right, you did. That's why I stayed away for a little bit. See, no, listen, I'm serious. I'm not exaggerating. Bill and Ruth had to watch shotgun over those babies. Ruth would get some sleep. Bill would stay up at night, watching for those critters to come out. And then Bill would get some sleep, and Ruth would sit in that chair. And boy, I said, oh, I can't stand this. Let me get out of here, But that's what my father-in-law calls relocation. John Perkins calls relocation. You relocate to the period of need, to the place of need. You don't run. You stay there and transform it. Perkins has lived his entire life like that. We still can't get him to move out of the hood. Even though I don't like going to his house for the exact same reason. Gotta watch my car and, being busted by boys in the hood. I don't like going to his house, especially at night, But they believe in Christian ministry that you relocate to the place of need. And Bill and Ruth did that at the same time that John and Vera Mae Perkins did it in the South. One in the South, one in Dixieland, others here in Chirac. Okay, all right? They did that. That is what Christian commitment really looks like. Bill taught me what it means to cultivate the life of the mind. 1973, 74, Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. We had a special missions conference at Covenant College. Come find out that Francis Schaeffer was in the neighborhood. And he actually came to our conference just for half a day. And so we allowed Schaeffer to speak. This is the Francis Schaeffer, the king of evangelical public intellectualism. Bill Bentley had announced him. Bill was sitting to the left or right of the podium, and as Schaeffer was engaged in his, hate to say it, in his Eurocentric analysis of the problem of the West, Bentley kept shaking his head in disagreement. Schaeffer stopped his lecture and said, you disagree with what I say, right? Bill said, yes, I disagree. Schaeffer said, okay, you stand up here and let's get it on. Oh my goodness. That was better than Ali and Frazier in 71. Oh, I couldn't believe my good luck. Seeing the two icons of Christian public intellect, neither of them were scholars in academic sense, but they were both about the cultivation of the life of the mind. That was, and Bill stood toe-to-toe with the great Francis Schaeffer. Bentley was my W.E.B. Du Bois. And I'll end this period with this word. When Bentley died in 1993, on the third Sunday of May, he was preaching. They had just moved to a new church, to a larger church, and Bill was preaching Sunday afternoon service. He was preaching on the love of God, admonishing his congregation to love God and to love each other. And then he stopped in the middle of his sermon. We knew that something was wrong. He stopped. The elders knew something was wrong with him. They got up and they helped Bill, and they laid him down on his back behind the pulpit. And the very last words that Bill uttered was, "I see angels coming." My God, that even say that just does something to my guts. Ruth knew what was happening. She knew what was happening. And we were planning for a big conference at Geneva College around Bill Bentley to have a chair, a William H. Bentley chair of evangelical thought at Geneva College. We went ahead to do this special conference on American Black evangelicalism. I gave the keynote paper. I was working for the Center for Urban Theological Studies, professor of Christian thought and contemporary culture, right? I gave myself that title, and the president said, "All right, that sounds good. That's what you do, so that's what you're going to be, professor of Christian thought and contemporary culture. You arrogant son of a gun." You know. But yes, I gave the keynote lecture. It was entitled, "The Making of an Evangelical Mind in the African American Grain, the Case of William Hiram Bentley." And when I said that he was my Du Bois, this is what I meant, and I'll close with this. I said, the first challenge that Bentley offers for Black evangelical thinkers is to grapple seriously with the dialectical tension of being both Black and evangelical. This theological variant of Du Boisian double consciousness is something that Black evangelicals must come to grips with if they are ever to experience genuine wholeness. Notwithstanding the problematics of defining the term evangelical, Black Christians in this species must finally learn to reconcile these two strivings. This is out of Du Bois' book, Prayers, Souls of Black Folk, 1903. To reconcile these two strivings and merge their double selves into a better and truer self. In true Du Boisian spirit, Black evangelicals should not seek to negate their evangelical identity, for Black evangelicalism has too much to contribute to both historic Black churches as well as to white evangelical mainstream. Neither should Black evangelicals seek to extricate themselves from their African American spiritual roots, for the souls of Black folk have too much to contribute to Christian thought and praxis. Black evangelicals should not fear the emergence of this better and truer self, which flows out of their aforementioned identity crisis. Black evangelical thinkers must accept Bentley's challenge to create a new world, indeed a reality that has never been, yet must be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks so much. You know, sometimes, friends, you set time limits and you go, "Oh, I'm worried about setting this time limit." But with this situation, it's really like, actually, I guess we really needed a lecture series is what we needed, because there's obviously a whole lot more that Professor Potter could share with us. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask him some questions, but you have to come to the microphone for picking it up for the recording. You have to come You have to come to the microphone. Sorry. So I'm not going to do. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Phil Donahue who would run around and ask people questions. That's not what we're doing, right? So you ask a question, I'll repeat your question. The microphone picks it up, and he answers into the microphone, and it's with us for posterity. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I will then convey it to the mic. I guess that, oh, well, wait, I almost was going to get the first question, but my colleague, Dr. Kristen Fort, has a question.
Okay, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful memoir / historical overview / beautiful lecture. I have many questions, but I will just ask one at the moment. I am struck by the fact that as a Wheaton alumna myself, much of what you shared during your experience, your 2 years here, of course, resonates with my experience from not long ago, and perhaps current students' experience as well. A question my students often ask me that I want to ask you is what, if anything, has changed, not about Wheaton College, would you say has shifted in terms of Black evangelicalism since your initial address that you gave on campus at Wheaton and now?
The question is, what's changed? Not so much with Wheaton, but in terms of Black evangelicalism since that interesting day in chapel when he was on the panel.
Excellent question. I had to wrestle with that question at the 1993 conference we had at Geneva College. The whole conference was highlighting African American evangelicalism at Geneva College. It was like a who's who within the then evangelical world. We had James Theodis Roberts, who was a colleague of James Cone, one of the co-founders of Black theology. We had the president of Fuller Seminary. We had Carl F.H. Henry. That's right. The first editor for CT, right? Gosh, so many people. Tom Skinner gave the banquet address. As crazy as it sounds, Bill Pinnell was a respondent to my paper. You know? Now, that's weird, but that's what happened, you know? But at the conference, already there were many blacks who were disgruntled with even the term evangelicalism. Dr. Walter Fluker, longtime friend of mine, Dr. Fluker, who was discovered by Ruth Bentley and her husband when Fluker was a student at Trinity College. And they recruited Walter Fluker during his undergraduate years to join NBEA's student organization called NBCSC, National Black Christian Students Conference. Fluker went on to do his seminary work at Garrett Theological Seminary under the great ethicist there who went on to Boston University, John Cartwright, who taught ethics at Garrett. Cartwright then moved from Garrett to Boston University, where Fluker finished his PhD in ethics at Boston. Then when he came to our conference, he really challenged many of our presuppositions. He said, evangelical, he said, why are you holding on to a term that is obsolete? This is 1993. 93. So he said the whole term is obsolete. I don't use the term anymore because it does not reflect my lived reality as a black Christian. It wasn't just Fluker. There were several people at that convention, black folk, who wanted to get away from that term, evangelical. And of course, we know now that many white evangelicals are post-evangelical, and now remove that word post and remove the word evangelical. They're simply how they define Christian, whatever the word Christian means for them. So it's a difficult question that you're asking because the situation is fluid. And so therefore your hermeneutic, your social hermeneutic, has to be as fluid as the situation. You feel me? Okay. So therefore, I cannot give you a static answer to that question because the very phenomenon is fluid. It changes almost from one month to the next. I know that there was a period of 20 years from 1970 to 1989 when, for all practical purposes, I left the evangelical community, both black and white, especially when I went off to seminary, the nation's largest African-American seminary, ITC in Atlanta. And I dropped the label evangelical, because for the most part, I'll just be honest, at that point, I didn't want to see evangelicals, white, black, polka dot, for two major reasons. I felt that evangelical theology was obsolete, primarily because I had tasted the Kool-Aid of theological revisionism. Okay, you see what I'm saying here? All right. So that I didn't want to see, don't come to me with your Jesus. No, baby, I don't believe in that anymore. I gave a public lecture my last year at ITC at the first student lectureship series in '84. It was entitled The Concept of God, Examining the Concept of God Within Process in Black Theologies. You know, the one person I did not want in the audience was her husband, Bill Bentley, my former mentor. I said former at that time. He would recapture that status. He was sitting in the back, and he listened to what I had to say, and then we had a question and answer period. Bill Bentley beat my butt in public intellectually. It was like fighting Joe Frazier. Get off me, you know, little short man, Bill Bentley. Get off me, bam, 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 get away, get away. But see, Bill loved me. And so what he did, he said, Ron, it's obvious that you're going down the wrong road. He said, but I have never tried to beat you over the head with the Bible. I have always challenged you to think your way through, to think your own way through under the sovereignty of God. He said, Ron, I believe that God is going to bring you back to where God wants you to be in his own time. In his own, not in your own time, but his own time. He said, it is not because I believe there's anything within you that would do that. This is a Pentecostal pastor. He said, because I believe in the sovereignty of God. It's a God thing. Now, be honest with you, when he said that, I was so far gone theologically that I said to myself, that's BS. I would never tell him that because out of respect for him. But in my head, I said, that's just plain BS. Bill Bentley lived long enough to see the prodigal son come back home. That's a process. And for me, that was a many years process. And guess what? At age almost 72, it is still a process. Okay. So whether we continue with the label evangelical, which seems like it will forever remain undefined, the issue is, are you gospel-led? Are you Jesus transformed? And are you about not only the issues that Jesus was, but are you about the person and work of Christ? Okay. If you alleviate Christian soteriology and just hold on to Christian social action, excuse the expression, hell, anybody can do that. You don't need to be Christian to engage in social work or social transformation revolution. You can do that without believing in God. There was a time when I was asked, well, Ron, what do you believe? When I was in seminary. I said, what do I believe? I believe in two things. I believe in a personal God, and I believe in the salvific redemptive work of Christ in some sense. They said, what do you mean in some sense? I said just what I said, in some sense. I don't know in what sense, but in some sense. I had to mature out of that. That's a journey. That's a journey of the prodigal son coming back home. Then the next question would be, well, what is home? And that's an epistemological question, isn't it? As well as a metaphysical question. Where is home?
I'm just going to add one other thing that he noted that in a conversation we had earlier, and that's I think it's really important whatever people are going through that if you can be committed to justice without having to sacrifice your piety and without having to sacrifice your internal transformation, right? Because I think sometimes people have, if you will, a justice conversion that leads to a facing of an internal character commitment, right? And so then it's like, don't talk to me about my life, but let's talk about justice. And that's really a false dichotomy, right? And I think some people feel like they have to do that because they want to reject everything of the piety, et cetera, because of its disappointments. And then, of course, they then wind up often, in my view, so I speak for myself, not for other parties, in my view, they then indulge their character deficiencies while they pursue these good justice things, right? So I'm saying that everybody does that, but there are a lot of people who do that, right? And it's really a false alternative. So I think it's really important to think about your internal person as well as thinking about these holistic things. But I think you also need to process that with integrity, because life's complicated, and if people think that it's just a simple simple to be a certain kind of progressive or a certain kind of conservative or whatever. I mean, the world isn't that flat in terms of things, right? You have to deal with, all of the differences in terrain and how you're navigating all that in a life of faithfulness. Dr. McCrae. So what that's from what? Uh, okay, reflections on the scope and function of a black evangelical theology. So, for the record, Dr. McCrae quoted from that. Read the whole thing. Okay. All right. Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah. Great. Thank you. One or two more questions? Yes.
First, I want to say thank you for coming. Personally, I'm glad I showed up. I originally was going to say I had stuff to do, but my roommate was like, "Oh, I have to come," and he was like, "I'm really interested," but I'm glad I showed up. Um, it's funny because I have been wrestling with that question myself because I find myself in the middle of many aisles a lot of the time, and one of those recently has been theologically sound and worthy of our calling as Christians. So how over the years have you addressed that in a way that would bring kind of both sides of those aisles together?
The question is a question that is a very common experience for many African American evangelicals, which is if you are, like some of us, in between spaces, and perhaps you have friends that are in their, oh, who needs black theology phase, so they're a certain kind of white evangelical, and they're like, a plague on your house to black theology because it's liberal. And then there are other friends who are like a plague on your house in terms of white evangelical theology because of their experiences or their dissonances as African Americans. And you sort of stand in between. You kind of see like a little truth over here. You kind of see truth over here. And you're thinking about things like John 17, unity of the church, etc. How does one bring these things together? I think is that a fair representation of your question? Yes. So when you stand in between those things, meaning I believe that you see valid insights from both, how does one walk in the middle of that and perhaps bring things together and encourage others towards bringing those things together?
One of the things that I learned from one of my mentors, William Pinnell, who taught at Fuller Seminary from 1974 until his retirement in 2015, was how to live out what some people have called a generous orthodoxy or a humble apologetics. The operative words here are what? Humble and generous. I gave a paper at the 2012 NBEA convention in Chicago, and it was a paper on Jim Cone's then latest book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Cone made it very clear. There was nothing implicit. He made it very clear. He does not believe in any type of salvific value in the cross of Christ. He was upfront with that. Once upon a time, during the lifespan of Dr. Bentley, Cone kind of wavered on that. But in recent years, Cone is saying what he actually does believe. That book, by the way, is one of Cone's best books. It is a well-written book, well-thought-out book. But in my judgment, it is fraught with what I call theological revisionism. Cone is very clear that Jesus Christ is not any savior. If by savior, you're talking about someone who's going to save you theologically, and there's no such thing as the blood. In fact, Walter, Cone would have said, Walter, he was here. Walter came out with one of the best books I've read, written by anybody connected with NBEA. Here's Walter here. Walter, your big book in 2012. And that's, again, it's entitled what again?
Pro-black, pro-Christ, pro-cross, African-descended evangelical.
Pro-black,
Pro-Christ,
pro-Christ.
pro-cross.
Cone would have gone with the pro-black. All the rest of that can go into the trash. And Cone was clear about that. He was very clear about that. Pro-black, yeah, I'm pro-black. That cross stuff and that Jesus stuff, unless you're talking about Jesus as a political revolutionary, the rest of that junk can be trashed. And Cone was crystal clear about that. All right. And most of his, what I call his Coneites, I'm very close to mostly all of them. I almost married the womanist theologian who received her first PhD under Jim Cone. Almost married her. My current wife would say, well, thank God you didn't, because then you wouldn't have married me. You know. But in spite of the fact that Cone and I were on opposite ends of the pole, and we were, what Pennell was trying to get me to understand is that you've got to appreciate a person's humanity. And even if you believe they are as wrong can be, whether they are a black revisionist or whether they are on the borderline of being a white Christian nationalist, you better appreciate their humanity. You better appreciate their human dignity in spite of their opposition to you ideologically. That's true for Jim Cone. That's true on the white side of the equation as well. It's true for both. No, I'm not going to convert Cone to my biblical, so-called biblical perspective. Not going to do it for any white Christian nationalists. That isn't the point. The point is that and Jesus had a purpose for giving the parable of the prodigal son. Go back to that parable of the prodigal son. He's asked the question, who's my neighbor? Jesus then tells a story about this probable Jewish guy who gets jacked up on the road. He's robbed. And his own kinfolk wouldn't come to his rescue. Right? His own kinfolk, his own national would not come to his rescue. Even those within the church would not come to his rescue. And yet, the person who did was the least likely person, a Samaritan. And he ministered to him. He took care of him and then paid his hotel bill. And Jesus said, so you ask me the question again, who is my neighbor? Who do you think is my neighbor? And that holds true for my good brother Jim Cone, although we are worlds apart theologically. Okay? That also holds true for those who are on the opposite end of the ledger. It's an issue of humanity. Bentley could have easily, whether we're talking about certified black or not, Bill had a choice to remain as a so-called evangelical or to join all the other black revisionists. They weren't concerned about any black evangelical, black theology. Hell, they would say that trump that. Not, listen, not on Trump, but trump that. I'm not interested. You can call it anything, but you keep that doggone name evangelical. Well, that means having the blood of Christ. I don't believe in the blood of Christ. So junk that. Black, yes, black power, black nationalism, do it. But all that Jesus stuff, I mean for real Jesus stuff, with all the Christology that goes to it, I don't want to hear that. But Bill chose to stay within that particular paradigm, even knowing that many would not even accept it. And that's what time of day it is on either side. And is it a hard road to plow? You better believe it's a hard road to plow. But I think that's what it means to be an innovator and a dissenter. You dissent against the culture that is. And as an innovator, you bring about a new reality. Christians are both dissenters and innovators, both at the same time. You dissent against the powers that be, and as well as the thinking that controls that, and you become an innovator by creating a new reality, or helping to create that. And where does that start? That starts with you. You become what David calls the tribe of Issachar, the smallest group of fighting people that 1 Chronicles talks about, 1 Chronicles 12. The smallest group, a mere 200 and their chiefs. But yet they were the most effective. Why? The text says because they understood the times in which they lived. And they were able to give direction to God's people. Look, I'm leaving the stage. I'm almost 72 years old. My daddy-in-law is 91, and he's still doing this stuff. you know. So he knows time is out for him, you know. But yet we stay. And we stay because we stay in spite of the fact that we want to leave. I thought I had left. I thought I had escaped the evangelical world for good. I thought so. I said, really, I'm serious, man. I said, what did a king say? Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. No more evangelicals, no more Jesus, no more blood, no more cross. When I was a seminary professor at ITC, my raison d'etre, my reason for being, teaching theology and ethics at ITC, summer '86, my game plan was to erode the embedded faith of those students, my seminarians. That was my job description, I thought, as a theological revisionist. My job was to divest them of whatever faith they had. And if I could do that, then I'm successful. And I think that's what God said to me, buddy, you got some stuff to pay, baby. Yeah, I was like a Christian Apostle Paul, right? I mean, in terms of okay. Look, it's a God thing. You've got to, first of all, understand that it's a God thing, okay? And God runs the show. We don't run the show. I had no intention of coming back and doing this. Look, no, I wasn't. But God had other plans. And we're not privy to knowledge of those plans. That's what Dr. Vicola is talking about. We're not privy to that. What is our job? Like my mother-in-law, Vera Mae Perkins would sing, the Lord is leading me through the wilderness. All that I have to do, she says, is to follow. I said, well, Mom Perkins, that's too simplistic. He said, son-in-law, that's your problem. You think everything is too simplistic, but it's real. So Ron, sing the song again. Sing the song again, my son-in-law. You know, all that I have to do, Lord, is follow. Now, Ron, if you can get that in your gut, maybe you'll make it through.
I think that is a great place for us to thank Reverend Potter. So glad to have you here. Thank you all for coming. He's not running away like sometimes people do at the end of these things. So if you'd like to chat with him a little bit, it has been a long day, but he'll talk at least for a little while. So I think is that okay? I don't want to be like, he said he was going to talk all night is what he said. No, that's not what he said. So he'll be here for a little while. So if you'd like to chat with him a little bit, please do so. So thank you so much for coming. If you want to share with others what you heard tonight, this is being recorded, so please pass it on. Pass it on. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for coming.